We've got a lot to talk about today because the gaming industry just dropped a stack of headlines that honestly feel like they came out of nowhere. Some exciting, some messy, and some that are already making players furious. First up, Sony is in hot water after reports revealed the company is testing dynamic pricing on the PlayStation Store. That means different players could see different prices for the exact same game depending on the account, purchase history, or algorithm. Over 150 games across 68 territories are reportedly part of the test. And yeah, the community reaction has been exactly what you'd expect. Then we've got a surprising twist in the hardware world. The PlayStation 5 Pro is suddenly getting a second wave of demand thanks to the upcoming PSSR 2 update. Early impressions suggest the AI upscaling tech is finally reaching the level Sony promised. And according to reports, some retailers have already seen the system sell out again. Meanwhile, the industry continues its favorite hobby lately, layoffs. Even after launching one of the biggest games of last year, the teams behind Battlefield 6 have been hit with staff cuts as EA restructures its Battlefield studios. And if that wasn't enough chaos, Valve is now facing a new lawsuit in the UK over music licensing on the Steam platform. The claim argues that Steam never secured the proper rights for music used in games sold on the store, which could turn into a very messy legal situation. Oh, and of course, we've got more GTA 6 drama, because the hacker responsible for the original leaks is now hinting that the game's source code might already exist somewhere in the wild. No evidence yet, but the rumor mill is spinning again. So yeah, dynamic pricing controversy, PS5 Pro hype making a comeback, layoffs after massive success, a lawsuit hitting Steam, and more chaos surrounding GTA 6. Welcome to another completely normal day in the gaming industry. Here are the biggest gaming leaks and news you've probably missed this week. Alright, here's something funny about the God of War remakes discussion that nobody expected. Because ever since Sony started hinting that the original Greek saga might get the remake treatment, one question keeps popping up over and over again. Not about graphics, not about combat, not about story. No, people keep asking one thing. Are the sex minigames coming back? If you played the original God of War games, you already know what I'm talking about. Kratos walks into a room. Two women are waiting. You press a button. The camera politely turns away. Then suddenly you're doing quick time events while furniture starts shaking like there's a small earthquake happening in Sparta. You hit the buttons correctly, and the characters start expressing their enthusiasm a little louder. Miss the buttons, and apparently Kratos disappoints the entire room. Peak early 2000s game design. For years, people assumed those scenes were the result of a bunch of dudes in a studio going full teenage brain and saying, yeah, let's put this in the game. But here's the twist. According to Alana Pierce, who actually worked at Santa Monica Studio and helped write God of War Ragnarok, those scenes were largely designed by women on the development team. Yeah. Plot twist. Pierce talked about this on a stream and said she even worked with one of the developers who helped design those moments. And apparently those designers were actually very proud of them. She even mentioned something most players never noticed. When you walk into Aphrodite's chamber in God of War 3, the room itself was intentionally designed to resemble female anatomy. Yes, really. A whole group of female developers apparently worked on making that environment visually symbolic. And once someone points it out, you kind of can't unsee it. It's one of those weird details that flew completely under the radar for most players because at the time, everyone was too busy thinking about the ridiculous QuickTime events. Pierce also brought up something interesting about why sex in games often feels awkward in the first place. It's not necessarily because developers don't want to include it. It's because pitching those ideas in a room full of coworkers can feel weird. Imagine being the person who has to stand up in a meeting and say, okay, so here's the mechanic. Kratos walks in, and then we animate. Well, you know, suddenly animators have to animate it. Actors have to perform it. Designers have to build gameplay around it, and everyone in the room is pretending this is a completely normal workday. So developers often avoid it entirely. But Pierce actually thinks those old God of War moments should stay in the remakes. Not because they're masterpieces of storytelling or anything like that. They're definitely goofy, but she argues they actually say something about who Kratos was back then. That version of Kratos was angry, reckless, completely consumed by rage and excess. And those scenes help highlight that part of his character, which makes the transformation we see later in the Norse-era games even more interesting. Because the Kratos from the Greek saga is basically a walking disaster. The Kratos in God of War is a completely different man. Older, quieter, trying to bury the monster he used to be. So those ridiculous moments from the early games, as silly as they look today, actually help show how far the character has come. And honestly, that's kind of fascinating, because what used to be a meme mechanic from early PlayStation games might actually be part of Kratos' character history, which leads to the real question now that Sony is exploring exploring remakes of the Greek saga. Do you keep those moments exactly as they were, awkward QuickTime events and all, or do you modernize them for today's audience? And now we need to talk about something that just poured gasoline on the PlayStation pricing drama, because Sony might have just stepped into one of those ideas that sounds harmless in a boardroom, but looks really ugly once players actually see it happening. According to reports, Sony has been quietly testing dynamic pricing on the PlayStation Store since late 2025. The discovery came from price-tracking site PS Prices, which noticed unusual pricing identifiers in the PlayStation Store API showing that certain users were seeing different offers than others. And we're not talking about one or two titles. Over 150 games across 68 territories have reportedly been part of this test. Now here's the important detail. Sony isn't charging people more for a game, at least not yet. What they appear to be doing is giving targeted discounts to different players, meaning you might log into PSN and see a game discounted by 17%, while your friend logs in at the exact same time and sees no discount at all. Same store, same game, different price, and that's where people start raising their eyebrow, because the entire premise of digital storefronts was supposed to be the opposite of this. Remember the original promise when digital gaming started becoming mainstream in the late 2000s? Publishers said removing physical distribution would make games cheaper. No discs, no shipping, no retail middlemen. But that never happened. In many cases, digital games actually cost more than physical copies at retail stores. And now we're entering a world where two players standing in the same virtual store might be living in two completely different pricing realities. It's like walking into a supermarket and discovering the guy in front of you paid $5 for a loaf of bread, while the cashier charges you $7 because the algorithm thinks you'll still buy it. That's the uncomfortable part, because dynamic pricing systems usually rely on consumer data, purchase history, engagement level, spending habits. So imagine the possibilities here. If Sony's system notices you buy every big release day one, why offer you a discount at all? You're already trained to pay full price. But if another player rarely buys games, suddenly they might start seeing personalized deals designed to pull them deeper into the ecosystem. In other words, the system could end up rewarding people who don't spend money and punishing the most loyal customers. And that's why a lot of players are calling the idea icky. Not because discounts exist, everybody likes discounts, but because the pricing stops being transparent. It stops being one shared marketplace and becomes a personalized economy, where every user is quietly pushed toward whatever price the algorithm believes they'll tolerate. And when you combine that with the shift toward digital-only consoles, things get even more interesting. The PlayStation 5 Pro already launched with an optional disc drive. If players move fully into digital libraries, then the PlayStation Store becomes the only place to buy those games. No retail competition, no secondhand market, no store down the street offering $5 off, just one ecosystem controlling the pricing. Which is why the timing of this controversy is fascinating. Because right now, Sony is also seeing renewed hype around the PS5 Pro thanks to the upcoming PSSR 2 update, which tech analysts like Digital Foundry have described as a huge step forward in image reconstruction. So on one side, you have excitement about the hardware, and on the other side, you have a growing conversation about how the ecosystem itself might be evolving. All right, something interesting is happening with the PS5 Pro right now, and it's not what most people expected a year after launch, because suddenly the system is getting a second wave of hype. And the reason for that is something called PSSR 2. So first, let's break that down for a second. PSSR stands for PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. It's Sony's AI upscaling technology, similar in concept to NVIDIA's DLSS on PC. The idea is simple. Instead of rendering a game at full 4K resolution, the console renders a lower resolution image and then uses machine learning to rebuild it into something that looks close to native 4K, that frees up power for things like ray tracing, lighting, and effects. Basically, smarter graphics instead of brute force graphics. But the first version of PSSR had problems. There was ghosting, visual artifacts. Sometimes the image looked a little smeary when things moved fast. It worked, but it wasn't quite at the level people expected. Sony's system architect Mark Cerny always said that the tech would evolve over time. Well, that evolution seems to be happening now. The upcoming PSSR 2 update is rolling out this month, and it's already showing serious improvements in games like Resident Evil Requiem. Early analysis from outlets like Digital Foundry suggests the results are getting much closer to modern DLSS levels of image reconstruction. And that's a big deal, because if the upscaler works well enough, developers can push heavier ray tracing, denser environments, and better effects without tanking performance. In other words, the PS5 Pro suddenly becomes a lot more interesting, and players are noticing. Reports say the console has sold out on PlayStation Direct in the US, with demand suddenly spiking again after the PSSR 2 demonstrations started circulating online. It's basically basically the hardware equivalent of a car getting a brand new engine tune a year after release. People suddenly look at it and go, wait a second, this thing might actually be powerful. There's another factor pushing interest too. The ongoing rumors that the PS6 could slip into 2028 or later because of memory shortages and chip supply issues. If that happens, the PS5 Pro suddenly becomes the long-term flagship PlayStation console for several more years. And we're about to see the next big test. Crimson Desert is expected to heavily use the new tech as well. If that game shows similar improvements to what Capcom achieved with Resident Evil Requiem, then PSSR 2 might end up being one of the most important upgrades the PS5 Pro receives. So suddenly, the narrative around the console is shifting from expensive mid-gen upgrade to maybe this thing actually has a lot more life in it than we thought. If you thought Ghost of Yōtei was just going to be another big single-player samurai epic, there's a twist. Because alongside the main story, the developers are bringing back something a lot of players loved from the Tsushima days, Legends. And this time, it's launching March 10th as a completely free multiplayer mode. Now here's the cool part. This isn't some last-minute side project thrown together after the game was finished. According to the new info, Ghost of Yōtei Legends has been in development since the very beginning of the main game. So the multiplayer was designed alongside the core experience instead of being bolted on later. The structure is pretty similar to what fans might remember from the old Legends mode, but with some new ideas. Players can jump into two-player story missions where you and a partner go through narrative-driven co-op scenario. Think of it like a mini-campaign designed specifically for teamwork. Then you've got the four-player survival missions, where squads defend locations against waves of supernatural enemies. And these aren't just regular soldiers running around with swords. We're talking demonic and mythological enemies pulled straight from Japanese folklore. One example mentioned is a terrifying enemy inspired by the Snow Woman, a legendary spirit tied to icy mountain folklore. Imagine fighting those kinds of creatures around Mount Yōtei while the weather and atmosphere turn the battlefield into something straight out of a ghost story. To deal with all that chaos, the mode introduces 4 playable classes. Each class focuses on different combat styles and team roles. Some players will lean toward heavy damage, others might focus more on support, defense, or crowd control. Basically, the kind of team synergy that makes co-op modes addictive. Difficulty also scales depending on how brave you're feeling. There are 4 tiers: bronze, silver, gold, platinum. Each step up increases the challenge and changes how fast you earn experience and gear. So if you want a relaxed run, you can stick with the lower tiers. If you want to suffer a little and chase the best rewards, platinum is waiting, but that's still not the end game. Because after launch, the developers are planning something bigger, a raid-style mode designed for 4 players. The kind of challenge that requires coordination, strong builds, and probably a few retries before you figure everything out. Think massive boss encounters and difficult mechanics built around the mythology surrounding Mount Yōtei. So when you step back and look at everything together, this mode sounds like it's aiming to be more than just a fun distraction. It's basically a full co-op experience living alongside the main game. Which honestly raises an interesting question. If the single-player story of Ghost of Yōtei is already massive, and then you add a full Legends multiplayer mode on top of it, how many hours do you think people are about to sink into this game? So if you've been playing Resident Evil Requiem and wondering what's next, the director just dropped a little update that's actually pretty interesting. Because right now, the game is in a bit of a weird spot. People love the campaign, the reception has been strong, but once you finish the story, that's basically it. No extra modes, no side activities, just the main experience and then credits roll. And for a series like Resident Evil, that always feels a little incomplete. So director Koshi Nakanishi posted a video message thanking players and confirming the team is already working on new content for the game. First thing coming is something players have been asking for since launch: photo mode. Which makes sense because Requiem has some incredible environments and lighting. Half the time, players are already stopping just to stare at the scenery, so giving people a proper photo tool was basically inevitable. But that's not the big surprise. Nakanishi also teased a new minigame arriving around May. He didn't say exactly what it is, but if you've played older Resident Evil games, you probably already have a guess. A lot of people think this might be a return of Mercenaries mode. And honestly, that would make perfect sense. Mercenaries has been one of the most fun side modes in the series for years. Fast combat arenas, time limits, killing enemies to extend your clock, chasing high scores like it's an arcade machine. And considering how deep the combat mechanics are in Requiem, especially with Leon's moveset, that kind of mode would fit perfectly. It would also be really interesting to see how the other playable character handles that type of pressure. Leon is built for combat chaos. Grace is not exactly a walking arsenal, so a mode like that could play very differently depending on who you choose. But that's still not the biggest announcement. Right at the end of the message, Nakanishi confirmed something fans have been hoping for. Story DLC is coming. The team is already working on an expansion that will dive deeper into the world of Requiem. They didn't give a release window yet, just that it's going to take time and they want players to be patient, which honestly is a good sign. If Capcom is investing in a full story expansion, it means the game performed well enough that they're willing to keep building on it instead of moving on immediately. So the roadmap right now looks something like this. Bug fixes and performance updates continuing. Photo mode coming soon. A mystery minigame arriving around May. And a full story expansion somewhere down the line. Not bad for a game that launched with only a campaign. This GTA 6 story just took a weird turn, and honestly, it sounds like something straight out of a cybercrime movie. So remember the hacker who leaked early footage of Grand Theft Auto 6 a few years ago? That leak was massive. Internal development clips, debug footage, early builds of the game all over the internet. Well, that same hacker, Ariane Courtage, is apparently back online again and stirring things up. Now, this is where it gets strange. Courtage was sentenced to an indefinite hospital order after the whole GTA 6 hacking incident. On top of that, he was given strict restrictions, including intense supervision and even a ban on using VPNs. Basically, the system tried to shut down his ability to operate online entirely. And yet somehow, he's reportedly managed to get access to a phone again and is communicating through social media apps like Snapchat. So what is he saying now? According to posts circulating online, Courtage suggested that the source code for GTA 6 might already exist somewhere outside Rockstar. Not publicly leaked, not on the internet, but potentially in someone's hands. During a conversation shared online, someone asked whether the GTA 6 source had leaked the way Grand Theft Auto 5 did years ago. The response was interesting. No further comment. Now here's the important part. There is zero proof that the GTA 6 source code is actually out there. No files, no screenshot, no leaks, just a vague conversation from someone who was already responsible for one of the biggest leaks in gaming history. So this could mean a few different things. Maybe he's just talking. Maybe he's trying to stir attention again. Or maybe he knows something but doesn't want to say more publicly. And if you're Rockstar, even the possibility of that situation is probably terrifying. Because if the full source code for GTA 6 ever leaked, that would be an absolute nightmare scenario. We're talking about years of work, proprietary tech, internal tools, everything suddenly floating around the internet. That's the kind of thing that can create chaos for a developer. But right now, none of that has happened. The only confirmed leaks we've seen are the early development clips from years ago. And Rockstar has clearly continued development without slowing down, with the game now targeting a November 2026 launch window. Still though, the fact that the original hacker is somehow back online and talking about the game again is pretty wild, especially for a project this secretive, because Rockstar is famous for locking things down tighter than a vault, which makes the whole situation feel even stranger. This story is one of those moments that really shows how strange the modern game industry has become. Because on paper, this should be a celebration story. Battlefield 6 launched last year, and it actually did something the series hadn't done in a long time. It succeeded. The game became the best-selling title of 2025 in the United States. It also had the biggest launch in Battlefield history. After years of rocky releases and community frustration, EA finally managed to put the franchise back on track. You would think that kind of success means stability for the teams that built it. More support, more hiring, maybe even a victory lap. Instead, layoffs. According to reports, employees across multiple studios that make up Battlefield Studios have been let go. That includes developers from DICE, Criterion Games, Ripple Effect Studios, and Motive Studio. These are the teams that work together to build Battlefield 6. And the reason EA gave for the layoffs is something we've heard 1,000 times in the industry: a realignment. That word has become corporate shorthand for something like this. The game did well, the franchise is important, but the company is restructuring anyway. EA says the cuts are meant to better align teams around what matters most to the community, and that Battlefield remains one of their biggest priorities moving forward, which is the strange contradiction at the center of this story. The franchise is a priority. The game succeeded, the teams are still supporting it, but some of the people who built it are gone, and the timing makes it even heavier. Because just a few months before these layoffs, the Battlefield community lost a major figure in the franchise when Vince Zampella passed away in a car accident last December. So the series finally finds its footing again, and then the people behind it are dealing with another shock. This also isn't happening in a vacuum. Over the past 2 years, EA has gone through wave after wave of restructuring. In 2024, the company cut more than 650 jobs across its organization. In 2025, it shut down Cliffhanger Games, canceled the Black Panther project, and laid off developers at Respawn Entertainment. So this new round of cuts fits into a much larger pattern. And there's another huge factor looming in the background. EA is currently in the middle of a 50 $65 billion acquisition deal that would take the company private under an investor group that includes Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. Whenever deals like that happen, companies start tightening budgets, restructuring teams, and reshaping projects long before the paperwork is finished. Which means the Battlefield layoffs might not actually be about Battlefield at all. They might just be part of the larger financial chess game happening above the studios. Still, from a player perspective, it creates a really strange image. A game becomes the biggest Battlefield launch ever, and months later, the developers who helped build it are being laid off. That's the modern game industry in one sentence. Success doesn't always protect the people who made it. The question now becomes bigger than just Battlefield. If even a best-selling game can't protect developers from layoffs, what does success actually mean in the industry anymore? Alright, this one is a strange legal battle that could actually have huge implications for the entire gaming industry. Because right now, Valve is being dragged into a lawsuit in the UK over something that sounds almost absurd at first. Music rights. In games Valve didn't even make. Yeah, a UK rights organization called PRS for Music has started legal proceedings claiming that Valve never obtained the proper license for music used in games distributed through Steam. And here's where the situation gets weird. Steam doesn't create those games. Valve isn't the publisher of most of them either. Games like Forza Horizon, EA Sports FC, and Grand Theft Auto are developed and published by completely different companies. Microsoft, Electronic Arts, Rockstar. Those companies are the ones who license the music that appears in their games. So Valve's role is basically the digital storefront. Think of it like a giant online mall. Developers bring their games into the store and Steam sells them. But PRS for Music is arguing something different. In the UK, the copyright situation around music and games is split into two pieces. First, there's the license for putting the song inside the game itself. That's usually handled by the developer or publisher. But then there's another layer involving what happens when the game is downloaded or streamed by players. PRS says platforms like Steam should have their own license covering that second part. In other words, they're arguing that Valve is responsible for licensing music that plays in games, simply because those games are distributed on Steam. If that argument sounds familiar, it's because it's similar to how streaming services like Netflix or Prime Video license music for the shows they distribute. And if the courts agree with that interpretation, things could get complicated very quickly, because Steam hosts tens of thousands of games. Some of those games contain licensed music. Some contain original music. Some contain track developers probably forgot they even licensed. Suddenly, Valve could be responsible for music rights tied to an enormous library of titles it didn't produce. And this isn't the only legal headache Valve is dealing with lately. Earlier this year, a UK tribunal allowed a £656 million lawsuit to move forward accusing Steam of anti-competitive practices. On top of that, the Attorney General of New York also launched a case claiming Steam promotes gambling mechanics to minors. So right now, Valve is juggling multiple legal battles at the same time. And if this music licensing case moves forward, it could set a precedent that affects every digital game storefront: Steam, PlayStation Store, Xbox, Epic Games Store, basically any platform distributing games with licensed music. So something that sounds like a niche legal argument about copyright could actually reshape how digital game distribution works. Which raises a pretty big question. If storefronts become legally responsible for licensing music inside games they don't even make, do digital platforms start removing games with licensed soundtracks just to avoid the risk? Alright, let's talk about the Crimson Desert console situation, because this whole conversation has been getting weird over the past few months. People kept asking the same question over and over. Where is the console footage? Every trailer looked incredible. Huge open world, insane physics, wild combat, but almost everything shown publicly was running on PC hardware. So naturally, players started wondering if the console versions were struggling. And apparently the developers got tired of hearing it. A community manager from Pearl Abyss even responded pretty bluntly recently, saying they're not hiding anything and that he's sick of repeating the same explanation. So now we finally have the actual console performance breakdown for Crimson Desert when it launches on March 19, 2026. And honestly, the modes are pretty interesting. On the base PS5, players will have three options. Performance mode targets at 60 frames per second with low ray tracing. This is clearly the mode for people who care more about smooth gameplay than visual fidelity. Then there's the balanced mode, which runs at upscaled 4K with 40 frames per second. That 40 frames per second target is becoming more common lately because it works really well on 120 Hz displays. It gives you smoother motion than 30, while still pushing higher visual settings. Finally, there's the quality mode. That one runs upscaled 4K at 30 frames per second with high ray tracing enabled. This is the cinematic option. Maximum lighting and visuals, but lower frame rate. Now things get a lot more interesting on the PS5 Pro. The performance mode there jumps to upscaled 4K at 60 frames per second with high ray tracing. That's a big leap compared to the base console. Balanced mode pushes upscaled 4K from a higher internal resolution at 40 frames per second, still with high ray tracing. And then there's the quality mode, which runs native 4K at 30 frames per second with ultra ray tracing. Basically, the Pro version is doing what the Pro is supposed to do. Same frame rate targets, but with much stronger lighting and resolution. Now, when you look at these numbers, something becomes pretty clear. This game is extremely demanding. Even with modern hardware, the developers are balancing resolution, ray tracing, and frame rate pretty carefully. That's probably why most of the footage we've seen so far was captured on powerful PCs. It's just easier to showcase the game when you remove hardware limitations. But the important thing is this: the console versions actually seem perfectly playable. You have a 60 frames per second mode, you have a 40 frames per second middle ground, and you have the full visual showcase mode. So all that speculation that the console versions were secretly struggling behind the scenes, it might have been a little overblown. Now the real question becomes something else entirely. When this game launches in March and we finally see full technical breakdowns from outlets like Digital Foundry, will the console performance actually match these targets? Because if Crimson Desert really delivers a stable open world at 60 frames per second on PS5, that would be pretty impressive for a game of this scale.